Oh, thank you for having me. I'm listening to all these stories. I'm like, how are they cramming all this time into these little? I don't know that I have ever crammed my story into such a small amount. So this is a challenge tonight.
Let's try it.
um, I've been trying to contemplate how do I even begin, and I would, we had a a very brief courting before we met. I married a stranger. I'll just say that I married a complete stranger. I met someone. I was on the rebound emotionally from a previous relationship, and I met this person. I was out of town. I was 3 hours from home. I had moved out of town, so I was basically brand new in this city, in a new state, 3 hours from home. Met this person, and within 2 weeks of meeting him, we were dating. 2 months after that, we were engaged, and 5 months after that, we were married. And that, in and of itself, in hindsight, was a huge, I say, is a red flag. It's not always, but it is something to pay attention to, is what I tell people, is it at least something to pay attention to. So I during while we were dating, he started becoming very controlling, but I didn't know that that's what was happening. I was enamored with the attention that he was giving me. He always wanted to be together, um, and I just didn't pick up on things. So the abuse started early, the coercion, the control, which I am calling abuse because it was the beginning stages of what would become something so much bigger. And so it did not look like abuse at all in the beginning. It looked like somebody who just was, I'm just going to say, stupid. Like, just in hindsight, it just looked like very immature and ignorant behaviors that that tied into things that would become so much bigger later on. Um, Insisting that he take me to work, and so when I didn't live with him, so he would come pick me up. I had a car, I could drive to work, and I didn't even live that far from work. And he would come and pick me up and drop me off. I thought that was sweet. I thought it was endearing. But when he started making me late, and I eventually lost my job because he would not only make me late, but he would show up to work, and he would linger and loiter and everything. That happened actually later on when we were married. That happened later too. Um, uh, Being very much in control of where I was, who I went with. When we first met, I had a trip that was already planned prior to even meeting him, to go see my best friend up in Virginia. And again, he was a complete stranger. And but we were dating at this point, so he was a stranger, but we had started dating, and he wanted to go with me. He wanted to make sure that I was safe, wanted to make sure that I was in. There was a nor'easter that was coming in to weather wise, and it was going to be in that area, and he just wanted to make sure that I was safe. And my mom thought it was going to be a good idea that somebody would be with me. It would be a man. We'd be on a truck, on a bigger vehicle. And she was like, yeah, sure, go. I think it would be great. But what ended up happening is there was, there was some sexual interaction on that trip that, again, I wasn't ready for. I didn't know him. And I was in a very vulnerable place emotionally. So my guard was down. I just didn't understand, and I didn't also I just didn't really know how to say no. I had things happen in the past, and I didn't know how to say no. And so I went with it, and again, that was like right out the gate. and it was painted and it was packaged in a very pretty box. So it didn't seem like abuse, or didn't seem like red flags the way that we would think a red flag would look like. So that was just kind of how it started. Then we during the wedding planning phase was very difficult. I wasn't allowed to have anybody. I wasn't allowed to have the photographer take pre-wedding pictures of like me getting ready and me getting my hair done, or anything pre-wedding that I'm glad I got it when I got remarried. I'm glad I have those, photos with my new husband. But at the time that was a big deal, and people saw that. People in our circle around, my family members, were like, "This is really weird. So I actually went into the wedding with cold feet and really questioning, should I say I do? And but I thought that was normal. I thought that it was normal to feel that. I thought it was just pre-wedding angst, and I was about to change my life. And what ended up happening is, when we went through it all, got married, and on the honeymoon, the sexual abuse began right away. And I'm just going to say out the gate, my abuser never hit me, never pushed me, never threw anything at my body. There was no standard of physical abuse as what the other ladies were saying, and what most people think is physical abuse. There was none of that in my marriage. But I was physically abused. I was physically abused in the bedroom for 10 years. We were married for 10 years. I'm about to celebrate my 9-year freedomversary, is what I call it. But for 10 years, I was abused in the bedroom. And what I am now understanding throughout in these last 9 years is that the emotional, psychological, sexual, spiritual, financial, all the other types of abuse is still physical, because it attacks your nervous system, and your nervous system is with you for the rest of your life. And it's a lot harder to heal than a bruise or a broken bone. And I am still, I work with healing nervous systems now, and I'm still healing my nervous system 9 years later. But so some of the things that would happen is, well, he would cut me off from my family and my friends. I remember one time there was a incident with the wedding photographer, and he was going to he took some family photos for Mother's Day for my mom, and we were all there. It was me, my brother and his family, and my abuser, my ex. And for some reason, he thought that this photographer had some interest in me, and this man could easily be my dad, like an age gap. He thought that he had taken an interest in me and was looking at my body, and that he was behaving or dressed, or I don't know where he got it from, but what he said was he popped his collar because he knew that you were going to come. He was dressing young because he knew that you were coming. He was looking at your butt, and you shouldn't have worn those pants. They were too tight, and da 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 da. So we left. Like a few days later, he brought this to me and told me that that's how he felt. And he made me sit down, and he dictated an email to this photographer that it was supposed to sound like it was me saying these things, of how offended I was, and how I was so disrespected, and I couldn't believe that he had looked at me that way and thought of me. And I had to say all these things. And while I did resist, I tried not to. We got in a fight over it. The way that the fights would happen, because he wasn't hitting me, it was all mind games. It was all in my head, and he would twist things around, and the gaslighting, somehow he had a way of twisting my brain and confusing me so intensely that I would cave. And I didn't think there was any, they would go on and they would go on and they go on. So the only way to get out of these arguments, because it would go for hours and hours and hours, if I didn't cave, it wouldn't stop, and it would continue into the next day. So it would keep going. So I would have to cave to make him just stop. And if I didn't listen to him, if I didn't do what he wanted me to do, then that was a new argument, is that now you're disrespecting me. Now you're not honoring your husband. Which leads me, well, sorry, I have ADHD, so.
You're good. You're good.
I chase squirrels. That incident ended up that the photographer had returned the check to my mom for the pictures, which opened up a door of my mom had actually called me and like, what is this? What's going on? He heard me on the phone with her and came in there yelling and screaming. This was the first violent encounter. This is when the first violence started. And he came in there yelling and screaming and get off the phone. He ripped the phone out of my hand, threw it across the room. Of course, my mom is now thinking, oh my God, she's being beaten. Once again, he never laid a hand on me. But that turned into a whole thing. The next day she emailed me and he came in and saw the email over my shoulder. And from that point on, he started a conversation with my dad and was like, she's not your responsibility. And he cut me off from my parents. He cut me off from my friends. I wasn't allowed to go see them. I wasn't allowed to do things with them. I wasn't allowed to travel by myself. So all we had was our church at that point, which that's where I was about to go next. The church and the spiritual abuse is what held me there for so long. Once I said I do, I believed it was written in eternity and there was no turning back. And because of the way that scriptures were twisted and the Bible was used against me, because he knew that my faith was the most important thing to me. And if I didn't listen to him, if I didn't obey him, if I didn't submit in this way, submit meant grovel. Submit to him meant do as I say. I'm your God, essentially. He would never admit that, but that was just like Iris was saying, her abuser never said you can't wear pink, but she learned she couldn't wear pink. It's the same thing. I learned that I was to treat him like he was Jesus, like he was God, and I had to bend the knee and do what he said or else. And remember, there was abuse in the bedroom. So that was usually my consequence. The way that the Bible was used against me, I believed with every fiber of my being that if I were to try to leave, although I didn't want to at first, or I didn't think that was an option, but I also believed that divorce was not an option. So this was it. This was my life. And the way that I processed that and came to grips with it was, this is my calling. I was created to be his servant. I was created to love him and serve him because nobody else would. So I'm the one that has to do it. And that's how I lived for the rest of the 10 years. And, like I said, it's hard. It's really hard to condense this down because, the abuse was not obvious. We had a pretty little life, pretty little family. We went to church, every Sunday. We were engaged in all the church functions, and he had a business, and I worked for him in the business. I did leave at one point because there were some girls my age that were my friends that came to me about 3 years in, and they said because I would say I'm not allowed to do that. They started picking up on some of my language, and they would say, "Hey, can you do this? Okay, let's go do that." And I'm like, "Well, I have to ask so and so, and then he would say no, and I would say, "Well, I'm not allowed to." Or they would say, let's ride to, this city and do this thing. And I'm like, "Oh, I can't do that. I'm not allowed to." So they were like, "Okay, there's a problem." So they came to me and encouraged me to separate. One of the ladies that was older got involved, so the church got involved. I went and I stayed with the associate pastor for a while, for it was like a couple weeks. But the intention was always to come back. It was never to divorce. It was always to heal the relationship. And we had some counseling through with the pastor at the time. And it just got worse. The idea was from the other elders and the women in the church, it was submit more, be the godly wife, and he'll learn, and you can fix, basically saying without saying, you can fix him. That's kind of what they were saying through this mentality, was the more you lay down, the more you submit, the more you meet his needs before he has to ask for them, the better it'll be for you. I actually was told, go ahead and give him sex before he asks for it, because then that'll be better for you. Like, that was actually a sentence that was said to me. And so, yeah, all that did was make it worse. It just made it worse. The more I submitted, the more he saw that he could have that much more control. And, the violence, back to that thing. That's the first time he punched a wall. So, he would punch walls, and not often, but every now and then he would punch a wall, or he'd kick a wall, or he would throw something. And so it was very few and far between that actually happened. So I did not know that this was abuse. In fact, I did go to counseling, and the first time I wanted to go to counseling, he told me no, I couldn't do it. But I insisted. I was like, I have had counseling basically my whole life. I had some things happen before, and I needed counseling. I was like, counseling is important to me. I need it. So I did go and made an appointment, got counseling, and he followed me there. And when he came in, his face was so red, and his veins were bulging. And the counselor that I saw, or that, she came to the door, and she saw him, and she yanked me behind the door where, like, into the hallway from the waiting room door. She pulled me back, and she was so scared. I had no idea why she was scared. I genuinely had no idea. I didn't understand. I knew that I was mad that he was there, and I had seen that face before, but I didn't understand why she was so scared for me. And she was implying that I was being abused. And I was like, what? Like, it wasn't clicking. And so later on, I didn't see her again, but I saw another one later. And after years of seeing her, she eventually one day said, "Lorianna, this is abuse. You've got to leave." You know what I did? I never went back to her, because she hadn't heard his side of the story. And I was like, how can you call this abuse if you've never even heard his side of the story? Because what I was doing was I was always blaming myself because he did. I was always trying to justify everything that he did, because look, the Bible says this. Look, the Bible says this. But it's not what the Bible was saying. It was what I was being told the Bible was saying. Mm-hmm. And so everything was taken out of context, and it was presented in a way that fit his agenda. And even I could sit there and read it myself, but I would read it with his context. And so I was essentially brainwashed to read the Bible with a certain lens, that this lens that he is my authority. and that I answer to him. And and then of course, he answers to God. So everything that he says must be right because he was always praying. He was always, so that's why I didn't leave, because I didn't think I could. And I thought that I would go straight to hell. I thought that I would be damned. I would be damned for all eternity if I left. If I left, I would go to hell and there was no going back, because I would forever be in sin after the divorce, and there was no changing it. And that's, of course I could go on, that I wrote a whole book.
Write a book, and the link is going to be up here. So really quickly, how did you end up leaving? Like, how did you end up leaving?
So I had been praying and praying and praying, and there was something that it's too much for me to go into what made me decide that I wanted to, for sure. I think it was because somebody said, look, your children are seeing this and they're going to think that this is normal. They're going to think that this is what love is and that this is what marriage is. I was nothing. I was a shell. I was a zombie. I was a complete zombie. And I wasn't even there for my kids. I couldn't laugh. And so something happened, and I was like, I need to get to Sumter. Sorry, well, that's where I'm from. I need to get home. And he wanted to follow me, or he wanted to take me, and because he couldn't go, he didn't want me to go, but it was urgent. And so I started praying, and one day I was driving home from the grocery store, and I just was like, God, I will stay if I have to, but please let me go. And I have said that so many times, and I cannot say it without crying. Like, still to this day, I cannot say that without crying, because it was so real. Because in that moment, a veil was lifted, and it's like everything changed. My vision was completely different. Even the house that I was looking at, suddenly it's like my vision became clear. It was very physical veil lifting. And I heard go. And when I say here, my inner ear, inside I felt and I heard go. And that was it. And I called the domestic violence hotline because I had accepted that I was being abused. And I actually had gotten online and found a checklist of what domestic violence is from the domestic violence hotline. And everything checked except for being beaten and punched and, kicked and strangled and all those. And I started the process. I called them and I got in touch with a lawyer who kind of gave me some guidance. And at that point, it actually is a little bit of a blur at this point. But that's how I got out. I wrote him a little note, and I said, I'm leaving. The kids are with me. I can't take the abuse anymore. And while he was out of town, I picked the kids up from school and we went to a hotel, and I got my support system back, and I rallied my family. I did have an attorney that was helping me, and I followed instructions because I had no idea what to do. I followed instructions, and the rest is, again, it's in here. You think you know, but you have no idea.
All right. And a story of marital rape and domestic abuse in a Christian marriage is the title of it.
Yeah.